Hello, welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'm going to be repotting my Areca palm here. So this is a plant I've actually featured in a previous video. Basically about 3 years ago I had this plant for the first time and it was quite small, a little bit neglected, and it was suffering slightly. It had a lot of brown dying leaves on it, and also the pot was really congested. There was probably about 20 or 30 small young plants in the one pot. So I thinned it out down to about 4 or 5 plants, and then I also repotted to give it a slightly bigger pot size. So it's now about 3 years after that video, and as you can see it's grown a huge amount. In the previous video it was much smaller, and it's really starting to outgrow its pot now. It desperately needs repotting so it can be allowed to grow larger. So it's not looking at the best at the moment. The reason for that is I haven't actually done any maintenance on this whatsoever, just to give you an idea of what it looks like after 3 years of not touching any of the leaves and just letting it be. And the other reason is, certainly for these ones at the top here, the lower leaves are brown because they just die with old age, that's natural. But these slightly higher branches, they've got that yellow effect because I moved house. It was a much brighter location where I moved the plant to, so the leaves got a little bit of scorch. And then the issue that the plant had is it was in a conservatory which got quite cold in winter, so it got a little bit of cold shock and a bit of cold damage. But since then it's been growing well. You can see the new leaves at the top are looking very lush, they're nice and green. They've been growing just in the last summer, the last few months. They're much darker green, much healthier, and they're much bigger as well as the plant is getting much more mature. And when it comes to the plant itself, it's still quite congested in the bottom, but you can see down the bottom there's one main plant in the middle which is much bigger than the rest, and there's a couple of smaller ones on the side which I might still remove. Now this is an Areca palm, so naturally it would start to grow multiple shoots from the base and be a clumping type of palm. The plants you see at the moment aren't from that one plant that's starting to clump up. They're actually 4 or 5 individual different plants. So my worry is in the future, if this clumps up further, it'll be really, really congested. So I might take out 1 or 2 of the smaller ones, but I'll make that decision later on. First of all, I'm just going to remove all this dead material, just tidy it up a little bit, make it look a bit nicer before I go into repotting it. So first of all, I'm going to take off brown dead leaves at the bottom. This is quite normal for palms to do as they get older. They tend to lose their older leaves and they die off, and you just want to take them away. You can either cut them off with scissors or secateurs when they're yellow, or if you want to, you can leave them until they go brown, and then you can sometimes remove them by hand. Other times you need to cut them with secateurs. So if the lower leaves on the base are quite old, they will sometimes just naturally pull away like this, and if they come away gently, then you can just gently pull them. But if there's quite a bit of resistance and they're not coming easily, then you will need to get secateurs or scissors and cut them off. So the main reason for doing this is really just for appearance. It looks a lot nicer. You can see the stems and you can see all those nice green leaves a lot better. It's a much nicer looking plant. Also, if you have a large number of them, it can start to shade out some of the other leaves, particularly the higher up ones. The bottom leaves not such an issue, but certainly the higher up leaves, it can start to shade out sunlight from the healthier leaves. So you certainly want to remove any dead leaves whenever they start to go brown. And then when it comes to yellow or damaged leaves, that's more of a personal preference. If it's still a bit of green on it, it's still photosynthesizing, providing some energy for the plant. So quite often I will leave them until they're looking quite ugly or damaged. If you check each individual stem, as long as you've got 2 or more leaves on each individual stem, you can remove some of the older ones. So this one here, for example, there's 4 nice healthy leaves up here. So I know I can remove this lower leaf and it's not going to cause much issue for the plant. It's still got leaves to photosynthesize with, it's still going to grow well. So what I'm going to do now is remove some of these smaller, more damaged leaves that were damaged from the cold shock and the sun scorch last year, and that will just improve the appearance of the plant. Now I've cleared the base a little bit. You can see there's a few bracts on the side. If they are loose, just pull them off, but you don't want to rip them off with a lot of force because that will damage them. So if you do remove any of these browner bits lower down, as I say, just be gentle. You don't want to cause any damage to the main stem. So now I can see a bit better the base of the plant. You can see there's several young shoots coming up here. Now the very smallest ones I will remove because this is going to clump further and it's going to be a huge number of palms soon. And you can see this more mature palm in the middle is actually sending up a new shoot from the base. You can just see here it's coming out from between the leaves, so that's going to be an offshoot in the future. So this is going to keep clumping up naturally. So I want to remove some of these very small weaker plants to make more space for this large mature plant, so that when it sends up suckers from the side, there's actually space for that to grow, because in the future it's going to get really congested and there's not going to be enough space for this to really get to a good size. If it's too outcompeted with lots of other plants in that pot, it will really restrict the eventual size that it can get to. So looking around here, there's certainly this one here I want to remove. That's very small and it's not going to come to much. So if possible, I'll pull it, I'll just try and tease it out. If not, I can just cut it off at the base, and if I keep cutting it off every time it resprouts, I'll run out of energy basically and die off. That's what I did previously with this plant, just to give it a bit more space. So the other ones aren't too bad. They're a little bit small, but they're not really tiny, so I'm going to leave the other plants. And what I'm going to do is just continue to improve the appearance of the palm, take off some more of these damaged leaves. As I say, it's really just for aesthetic reasons, just make it look nicer. If they've still got a bit of green on them, I often would leave them just to allow the plant to photosynthesize more and grow even faster. So that's all the damaged leaves gone. You can see it's a much more open plant. You can see the leaves a little bit more easily now. It just looks a little bit nicer for it, and you've got that clear stem showing off more of the actual palm trunk that's starting to form. So the next bit of the video, I'm going to be repotting it, putting it into a larger pot. As you can see, for the size of this plant, the pot is actually really small, so it definitely needs repotting. So I need to be putting it in quite a bit bigger pot. This palm is quite quick growing now. It used to be a slow growing palm, could have had it in low light conditions. A lot of palms are very adaptable to light conditions, especially if they're palms that are well suited for house plants. They tend to be palms that naturally grow on the undergrowth from forests, but then eventually get up near the canopy and can handle also the direct sunlight. So they're very adaptable. They can handle quite a lot of shade, quite a lot of light. So this Areca palm, in my previous flat where I used to live, it had low light levels. I then moved house to where I am now. It's in a conservatory with quite high light levels, so the growth is much faster. It did have a little bit of damage to the leaves as it was acclimatizing, but now that it's acclimatized, its leaves are healthy, it can handle that strong sunshine, and it'll grow much faster because of that extra light level. So before I can repot this palm into its new pot, I actually need to break off some of the roots from the base. Basically, because this has been in the pot for a while and it's got quite pot bound, you can see a lot of the roots are coming out the base there. I can't actually pull this out of the pot because these roots are basically anchoring it through the holes of the drainage holes in the bottom of the pot. So what I'll do to begin with is I'll use my secateurs and I'll just cut all those roots off. You're much better to remove those roots with a clean cut. If you rip them off by hand, you leave large wounds, it's more likely that they could get rot, infection, and then that would be detrimental to the plant. So the next thing we're going to do is inspect the root system, see how it's doing, see if I need to remove any of the roots if they're becoming very congested at the bottom of the plant, and also see generally how it's doing, if there's any kind of root rot or any issues with drainage. That will give me an idea of how well it did in this substrate last year, if I need to water it better or less, and also whether I need to make the new compost more free draining or not. But I suspect it should have done quite well in this soil, as it has been growing quite quickly and healthily for the last year or two. So looking at the root system, it does look particularly healthy. You can see there's lots of healthy roots all around the pot. There's not any empty areas where there's no roots, and all the roots are a nice kind of bright colour. There's not any black or rotting roots, so it looks like it's been quite happy and quite healthy. There's also some quite rapidly growing thick roots here. You can see that white tip on there. If you see white tips on the end of the roots, that generally means they're growing quickly and they're healthy and happy. And on the bottom there is a bit of congestion, so I will cut the very base off. You can see there's sections right here at the bottom where basically there's no compost at all, it's just a mass of roots. If the roots aren't surrounded by compost, they can't really absorb much water or nutrients, because all they come into contact with is other roots which are also trying to absorb nutrients and water. So I'll remove the bottom of this, and then that will actually just encourage more growth from the roots higher up. That way it will put out new roots, and those new roots will grow into fresh compost instead of being congested with each other. So I'm just going to go ahead now and just cut off all these lower down sections where it's really badly congested. So now the most congested section of the root system is cut off, it's time for me to pot it up into the new plant pot. Now the new one will be quite a bit bigger, but I'm going to plant it a little bit deeper than it was before. The reason being, when I have a closer look here at this root system, there's quite a few roots which are exposed to the above the compost in the air. So I want these to be covered. So I'm just going to plant it slightly deeper in the new pot, so the compost line is up to about here instead of lower down there, so that these roots are nicely covered. So I can just check the height of the pot there and see how much more compost I need to add. Now when it comes to the compost mix that I'm using a multi-purpose compost which has got quite a bit of perlite mixed in, probably only about a fifth or a sixth perlite, and about a fifth or a sixth of orchid compost, a bark-based orchid compost, just to help it be free draining and not get too sodden with water. You want a nice free draining mix. If the compost doesn't drain well, it can lead to root rot problems and the plant won't grow as well. You can see in this plant it's been very happy in the past, the roots have grown well, there's no dead or dying roots. If you notice a lot of the roots are dying off, it's either due to overwatering or soil that doesn't drain easily enough. So with adding the perlite and also the bark into the mix, it helps it really to drain nicely. And it does need quite a rich mix as well, which is why this is mainly multi-purpose compost. The rich multi-purpose compost holds onto a lot of moisture, also a lot of feed, and these are quite hungry plants, so they need that feed and that moisture, but they also need to be free draining, which is why you need a mix like this. So that looks to be about the right level. I just need to try and make sure it's mostly straight as I put it in the pot, and then I'll fill in around the edges with the compost. And I want to make sure that the compost is all around the roots, there's not any air gaps, but you don't want to push down hard. If you push down hard, you'll compact the soil and then you won't have a nice loose mix, and the roots will struggle to grow through it. The water won't drain out the pot as easily and it can lead to root rot issues. So what I tend to do is just shake the pot or kind of tamp it down like that and just very gently firm around the edges, make sure the compost is pushed down, but I never really push very hard. It's always quite soft and gentle with this, just to make sure that you don't damage the soil structure. And you can see there the compost has sunk down quite a bit, so I'll just top that up now just to make sure these roots are covered. So that's the palm now repotted. What you'll probably find is when you give it a good watering after it's been repotted, it'll wash a lot of the compost down into the spaces in the roots, and you'll probably need to top up the compost very slightly. So once it's repotted, give it a really good soak with water, make sure that it drains out freely from the bottom of the pot so you know it's a free draining soil mix, and make sure the pot also has plenty of holes in the bottom so that no excess water sits in the bottom of the pot. Then top up any of the compost if it needs it and it's sunk down with the watering. Now when it comes to looking after it now, just look after it mostly normally. Water it a little bit less than you would before, because it's got more compost, more space for the water to be contained, and you cut some of the roots off as well. The plant won't be drinking as much water, especially if you've taken off some of the top growth. So you just want to water it slightly less than you would before you repotted it, but you should find within a month or two the roots will establish into the new compost. There'll be plenty of roots to suck up the moisture, and the plant will be quite thirsty again and just need watering regularly like before. So that's all for this update. I'll give you guys another update probably in another year or two when I need to repot this again. This palm, now that it's in a heated conservatory, it gets high temperatures in the summer, good light levels as well. It's going to be quite a fast growing palm for me, and I suspect this could get to 6 foot in maybe 2 or 3 years time. We'll just see how it does. At the moment it's probably about 2 foot in height, but once it really gets established and gets large leaves, and if it's in a good light environment with high temperatures and good humidity, these can grow really quickly. So they can easily grow several feet in a year if they're in the right conditions, or if they're just in a dark room in a cool house, treated like a normal house plant, they'll grow incredibly slowly, and it might take 5 or 10 years to grow 1 or 2 foot. It just depends on the conditions that they're growing in. They're very adaptable plants, and they'll just make the most of the situation. So if they've got great growing conditions, they'll grow quickly. If they don't have great growing conditions, they'll just slow right down and grow very slowly. So that's all for this update, and I'll see you guys in a few years time when it comes to repotting this into yet another larger pot.